Nobody liked being managed by expensive lawyers, but Wong was professional enough to recognize the game. Crystal clear, Miss Walsh. We simply want to understand Mr. Romano's connection to the victim and whether he might have any information that could help us identify the shooters. Then let's proceed on that basis, Catherine said, settling into a chair and nodding at Vincent to continue. As I was saying, Vincent resumed, Sophia and I are not close in the way your question implied, Detective Murphy, but I have tremendous respect for her. She's dedicated, compassionate, and exceptionally good at what she does. When my nephew was dying, she fought for him like he was her own family. That kind of person is rare in any world, let alone in a place as overwhelmed and underfunded as a public hospital. So, yes, I made donations. And yes, I've been back to the hospital multiple times, but not to pursue Sophia romantically or for any other personal agenda, simply to support the work she does. Noble sentiments, Murphy said, his skepticism evident. But you'll forgive us for being thorough. In our experience, when someone with your background takes an interest in a civilian, it rarely ends well for the civilian. Catherine's hand came down sharply on the table. Detective, that borders on slander. My client's background consists of legitimate business interests in import-export, real estate, and hospitality. If you have evidence of criminal activity, charge him. If not, stick to questions relevant to this investigation. Wong shot her partner a warning look before turning back to Vincent. Let's approach this differently. Romano, do you have any idea why someone would target Sofia Martinez? Any enemies she might have mentioned? Any unusual incidents or threats in recent weeks? Vincent shook his head. Sophia doesn't have enemies, Detective. She's a pediatric nurse. She spends her days saving children and comforting worried parents. The very concept of someone wanting to hurt her is absurd. And yet someone did, Wong pointed out. 2 professional shooters in a hospital parking lot. This wasn't random. The preliminary investigation suggests Sophia may have witnessed something significant enough to warrant silencing her. This aligned with what Nurse Maggie had mentioned earlier. What kind of something? Murphy consulted his notebook. We're still piecing that together, but there's a complication. The third victim, Daniel Castellaniano, the attorney who was also shot. He's connected to a case involving Senator Richard Harwood. Castellano was preparing to testify before a grand jury about financial irregularities in some of the senator's campaign funding. Vincent's mind immediately began connecting dots. Senator Harwood was a political fixture in New York, 3 terms in office, chairman of several influential committees, and widely rumored to have connections to various criminal enterprises. Though I should tell you up front, I wasn't present during the incident, and I'm not sure how much help I can be. Let's start with your relationship to Ms. Martinez, Murphy said, pulling out a notebook. Hospital staff say you've been a regular visitor here over the past few months. Anonymous donations, equipment purchases, attendance at fundraisers. That's a significant investment for someone who claims to barely know the victim. I wouldn't say I barely know her. Vincent corrected. Sophia saved my nephew's life 6 months ago. I'm grateful. The donations were my way of showing that gratitude to the hospital and the pediatric unit where she works. Nothing more complicated than that. Wong leaned forward slightly. And yet, when she was shot, you were called. Her phone had you listed as an emergency contact under the name Vincent. Not Mr. Romano or Alex's uncle or anything that would indicate a distant professional relationship, just Vincent. That suggests something more personal. Vincent kept his expression neutral, though internally he felt a jolt at this information. Sophia had listed him as an emergency contact. When had she done that, and why? They'd barely spoken beyond polite pleasantries in the hospital corridors. I'm as surprised as you are, Detective, he said honestly. Sophia and I have only had a handful of conversations. Perhaps she had a reason I'm not aware of. Or perhaps you were closer than you're admitting, Murphy suggested, his tone implying things Vincent didn't appreciate. Before Vincent could respond to the implication in Detective Murphy's tone, his lawyer arrived. Catherine Walsh, senior partner at Walsh and Bingham, a woman whose reputation for aggressive defense made prosecutors wise and judges groan. She swept into the waiting room like a force of nature wrapped in a charcoal pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Detectives, she said crisply, not bothering with pleasantries. Catherine Walsh representing Mr. I understand you have questions, but before we proceed, I need to clarify something important. My client is here voluntarily out of concern for Ms. Martinez and a genuine desire to help your investigation. He is not a suspect. He has committed no crime, and any suggestion to the contrary will result in this conversation ending immediately. Are we clear? Detective Wong's expression didn't change, but Vincent caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Sophia will be safe there while she recovers. Here, she's a sitting duck. Even if what you're saying is true, Dr. Harrison argued, though his conviction was clearly wavering. The medical risk of transport alone will be minimized by the private ambulance with advanced life support that's already en route. Alex interjected smoothly from his position by the door. ETA 15 minutes. Full medical team on board, including a trauma surgeon in case of complications during transit. Harrison looked between Vincent and Alex, realization dawning in his eyes. You'd already decided this before you even spoke to me. I'm not asking for permission, Doctor, Vincent said, his tone gentling slightly. I'm asking for your cooperation to make this as safe as possible for Sophia. You care about her. I can see that. Everyone who works with Sophia cares about her. So help me protect her. There was a long moment of silence broken only by the ambient sounds of the hospital. Distant announcements over the PA system, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the hushed conversations of medical staff changing shifts. Finally, Dr. Harrison, the sound of a man recognizing defeat when it was inevitable. I'll need to see your facility's credentials, he said, and I want medical personnel from our team to accompany her during transport and stay with her for at least the first 24 hours. Vincent agreed immediately. Send whoever you trust. They'll have full access to Sophia and all our resources. And if she deteriorates during transport, we bring her back here immediately. No arguments. Agreed. Harrison shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was consenting to. Give me 20 minutes to prepare her for transport and brief my team. And Mr. Romano, if anything happens to that woman because of this decision, credentials and resources be damned. I will make it my life's mission to destroy you. Vincent met the doctor's eyes without flinching. If anything happens to her, Doctor, you won't need to. I'll do it myself. Harrison disappeared back into the ICU to prepare Sophia for transport. Vincent turned to Alex. I want a complete security detail at the facility. 3 teams rotating 8-hour shifts. Nobody gets in or out without my personal approval. And get Carlos working on identifying those shooters. I want names, addresses, family members, favorite coffee shops, everything. Already on it, boss. Alex confirmed, tapping rapidly on his phone. But there's something else you need to know. The police are here. Detectives. They're not asking nicely anymore about talking to you. Vincent's jaw tightened. Police involvement was inevitable, but inconvenient. The last thing he needed was cops stumbling through his investigation, potentially tipping off whoever was behind the attack. But refusing to cooperate entirely would only make them more suspicious. Where are they? Waiting room, main floor. Detectives Lisa Wong and James Murphy. Wong's been with NYPD for 15 years. Murphy for 8. But just in case, I wanted you to know you're safe. You're going to recover. And whoever did this to you, Sophia, they're going to pay for it. I promise you that. He sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, time losing its usual meaning in the quiet of the room. His phone buzzed periodically with updates from his organization, but he ignored it. For once, the business of running a criminal empire could wait. A soft knock at the door announced Alex's arrival. Boss, sorry to interrupt, but Carlos has got something. He's downstairs in the conference room. Says it's urgent. Reluctantly, Vincent released Sophia's hand and stood. He leaned down, surprising himself by pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. I'll be back, he whispered. I promise. The facility's conference room was on the ground floor, a windowless space designed for privacy and security. Carlos was already there, his laptop open on the table, surrounded by printed photographs and documents. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usual neat appearance disheveled, his eyes red from staring at screens. Please tell me you have good news, Vincent said, closing the door behind him. Good and bad, Carlos replied. Good news first. I identified the shooters, Alexei Volkov and Dmitry Sokov, both former Spetsnaz, both working as enforcers for the Kosov Bratva. They're not subtle operators. Their specialty is intimidation and wet work, not surgical hits. Which explains why everything went sideways when Castaniano showed up. They were sent to kill a nurse, not handle a complication. Vincent studied the photographs Carlos had pulled up. Two hard-faced men in their 30s, the kind of people who looked dangerous, even in casual settings. Where are they now? That's the bad news. Volev's dead, killed in what looks like a professional cleanup about 3 hours after the hospital shooting. Single bullet to the back of the head, execution style. Body was found in a warehouse in Red Hook. SOV's gone to ground. We're working on finding him, but he's smart enough to know he's next on the chopping block. Vincent absorbed this information, his mind racing through implications. Someone's cleaning house, eliminating loose ends. Exactly. And there's more. Carlos pulled up another file on his laptop. I dug into Senator Harwood's connections like you asked. Turns out he's been taking money from Dmitry Volkov's operation for years. Campaign contributions laundered through legitimate businesses, personal favors, protection from investigations. In exchange, Harwood makes sure certain police operations get redirected, certain prosecutions don't happen, certain regulatory issues disappear. So when Castellano, the attorney, decided to testify about Harwood's financial irregularities, he was threatening to expose not just the senator, but Dimitri's entire New York operation. Carlos finished. So Vincent had taken to reading aloud from a collection of children's stories he'd found in the facility's library. The same kind of stories Sophia apparently used to calm frightened children in the pediatric ward. He'd felt ridiculous at first, sitting there reading about talking animals and magical forests to an unconscious woman. But there was something cathartic about it. Something that kept his mind focused on the future where Sophia would wake up and be okay rather than dwelling on the violence he was about to commit. Now standing in the warehouse with Dmitry Solov's zip tied to a chair in front of him. The contrast between those two worlds couldn't have been more stark. Soph was a mess. Bloody nose, split lip, one eye already swelling shut from where he'd resisted capture. But he was conscious and terrified, which was exactly what Vincent needed. Dmitry Solov, Vincent said conversationally, pulling up a chair and sitting down opposite the Russian. Former Spetsnaz, current enforcer for Dmitry Volkov, and recently employed as an assassin targeting innocent nurses. We need to have a conversation. I want lawyer, Solov said in heavily accented English. I know my rights. You cannot. The backhand came so fast didn't see it coming. The impact snapped his head to the side, blood spraying from his reopened lip. Let me explain something to you, Vincent continued calmly, as if the violence hadn't interrupted his sentence. You're not under arrest. There are no lawyers coming. There are no rights being violated here. This is simply one professional to another having a conversation about choices and consequences. Your partner, Alexei Volov. Someone put a bullet in his head. That person was probably Dmitry cleaning up loose ends. Which means right now you have two options. Vincent leaned forward, his eyes locked on Solov's. Option 1. You tell me everything. Who gave you the order to kill Sofia Martinez? Why she was targeted? What the plan was if things went wrong, and anything else I want to know. In exchange, I let you live, not free, not unpunished, but alive. I'll even throw in protection from Dmitry's people if you're worried about reprisal. And option 2, Solov asked, though his voice was shaking now. Option 2 is I let Alex here ask the questions. Vincent gestured to where his second-in-command stood in the shadows. Alex is very good at his job, but he's not as patient as I am. You'd eventually tell us everything anyway, but the process would be considerably less pleasant. So, which option sounds better to you? So, was silent for a long moment, weighing his choices. Vincent could see the calculation happening behind the Russian's eyes. Loyalty to Dmitry versus self-preservation. The oath of silence versus the very real possibility of dying in this warehouse. Finally, survival won out. Okay, so said quietly. I tell you, but you promise protection. Dmitry finds out I talk. I'm dead, man. You have my word. Now start talking. The story that emerged over the next 2 hours was worse than Vincent had feared. Sophia hadn't been random collateral damage or even a potential witness to some ancillary crime. She'd been specifically targeted after Emily Harwood, the senator's daughter, had mentioned to Dmitry Volkov during a private meeting that a nurse at St. Mary's seemed unusually interested in my father's visits. Sophia, in her characteristic compassion, had apparently noticed how stressed Emily seemed and had asked if everything was okay at home, a completely innocent gesture from someone who cared about her patient's well-being. But to Dmitri and the senator, that innocent question had looked like suspicion, like potential exposure. They'd decided elimination was safer than risk, ordering Solov and Volkov to make it look like a mugging gone wrong. Castano's arrival had complicated things. He'd apparently been meeting Sofia to discuss her testifying about what she'd seen in patient records, though the attorney had been killed before the meeting could happen. Dmitri was angry when we failed, so concluded, said we were sloppy, that we'd brought heat down on operation. Alexei, he was panicking, talking about running. That's when Dmitri had him killed. I knew I was next, so I ran first. Vincent sat back, processing the information. Sofia had been condemned to death for showing compassion, for doing her job well, for being the kind of person who noticed when others were in distress. The injustice of it made his blood boil. One more question, Vincent said. Where does Dmitri operate from? I'm not talking about his public businesses. Where does he actually run his empire? So hesitated, and Vincent saw the moment the Russian realized he'd already gone too far to stop. Now, Brighton Beach, private club called Zalato, Gold in English, has office in back, very secure. Romano, you cannot just walk in there. Dmitri has many guards, many connections, even you. Let me worry about that. Vincent cut him off. He stood and nodded to Alex. Get him secured somewhere safe. Medical attention, food, whatever he needs. But nobody knows where he is except us. If Dmitri's people come asking, Sokolov's dead. Body dumped in the harbor. Understood. Yes, boss. As Alex led the prisoner away, Vincent pulled out his phone and sent a text to Carlos. Need a meeting with the other families. Tomorrow, neutral ground. Topic: Russian overreach and appropriate response. Sometimes it's figuring out how to make an impossible situation work. She left him there in the hallway, her words echoing in his mind as he tried to focus on the more immediate problem. Dmitri Volkov and the Bratva. The meeting with the other family heads took place the following evening in a private room at one of Little Italy's oldest restaurants, neutral ground that none of the families directly controlled. Vincent arrived with Alex and 2 bodyguards, finding representatives from the 4 other major families already waiting. Salvatore Benedetti, Michael Torino, Anthony Marino, and Isabella Caputo, the only woman to ever head one of the 5 families and possibly the most dangerous person in the room. Isabella greeted him with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. We were surprised to receive your request for this meeting. From what we hear, you've been rather occupied lately. Personal matters, Vincent replied evenly, taking his seat at the table. Which is actually why I asked you all here. The Russians have crossed a line. He laid out the situation in clear, precise terms. The attempted assassination of Sofia, her connection to the senator, and Dmitri Volkov's operation, and the broader implications of the Bratva targeting civilians for witnessing crimes they didn't even know they'd witnessed. He was careful to frame it not as a personal vendetta, but as a threat to all their operations. If we let Dmitri get away with this, Vincent concluded, we're telling every organization in the city that civilians are fair game, that the old boundaries don't matter anymore. How long before one of your people gets caught in crossfire? How long before families start suffering because we couldn't maintain basic codes of conduct? Salvatore Benedetti, the oldest and most traditional of the family heads, nodded slowly. The boy makes a good point. There's a reason we've always kept civilians out of our business. Start targeting nurses and teachers and accountants just because they might have seen something. And pretty soon, the whole city turns against us. The cops get public support for crackdowns. Politicians make examples of us. It's bad for everyone. But Michael Torino countered, declaring war on the Bratva over one woman. That's a steep price for principle. Vincent Dimitri's operation brings in millions every year. He's got connections to Eastern European networks we can't match. You really want to pick that fight? I'm not asking permission to go to war, Vincent said carefully. I'm informing you that I'm moving against Dmitri with or without your support. But if the 5 families present a united front on this, Dmitri will back down. He's not stupid. He knows he can't fight all of us simultaneously and survive. Give me your backing. And this ends without a shot being fired. Refuse. And yes, there will be war, but it won't just be my problem. Dmitri will see the division as weakness, and he'll expand into all our territories while we're distracted. Isabella Caputo had been silent throughout the discussion, but now she leaned forward, her dark eyes assessing Vincent with unsettling intensity. This woman, this nurse, she's more than just principal to you, isn't she? You care about her personally. There was no point in lying. And if we back you on this, if we help you pressure Dmitri into compensation and a guarantee of no further action, what happens then? Do you keep this woman in your life? Make her a target for every ambitious punk who thinks hurting your girlfriend will give them leverage? Or do you do the smart thing and send her away? Vincent felt the weight of everyone's attention on him. This was the real question, the one that determined whether the other families would see him as rational or compromised. A mob boss who could be manipulated through personal attachments was a weak boss, a liability. I'm sending her away, he said, and was surprised by how much it hurt to say it out loud. Once she's recovered, I'm setting her up with a new life far from New York. New identity, financial security, protection, but from a distance. She'll be safe, and she'll be free of any connection to me or this life. Isabella studied him for another long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll support your move against Dmitri. Not because I give a damn about your personal life, but because he's right. She gestured to Salvatore. The Russians are getting too bold. Better to remind them now where the boundaries are. One by one, the other family heads agreed. Not enthusiastically, but with enough consensus that Vincent knew he had what he needed. They would approach Dmitri together, make it clear that his actions were unacceptable, and that further moves against Sofia or any other civilians would result in a united response from the Italian families. It was more than Vincent had hoped for, and exactly what he'd needed. The meeting with Dmitri Volkov happened 2 days later in yet another neutral location. This time, a warehouse in Queens that had seen its share of negotiations over the years. Dmitri arrived with his own entourage, a bear of a man in his 50s with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness that matched Vincent's own. Dmitri greeted him in heavily accented English. I hear you've been making waves, killing my men, disrupting my operations. This is not friendly behavior between business associates. We're not associates, Vincent replied coldly. Associates don't target civilians. Your men tried to kill a nurse, Dmitri, an innocent woman whose only crime was being good at her job. That violates every code we operate under. Dmitri waved a dismissive hand. Collateral damage, sometimes unavoidable in our line of work. Not when the collateral is someone under Romano protection, and not when it brings unnecessary heat down on all of us. Vincent leaned forward. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to make a formal apology to the 5 families for overstepping. You're going to pay compensation, $2 million to be split among various civilian protection funds we'll establish. And you're going to guarantee on pain of your entire operation being dismantled that Sofia Martinez and anyone else she cares about are completely off limits forever. And if I refuse, Dmitri asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer, then the 5 families move against you together. Your operations get shut down, your people get arrested or worse, and your connections back to Moscow won't be able to help you fast enough. You're a smart man, Dmitri. Do the math. The silence stretched for a long moment before Dmitri finally nodded, his expression sour. $2 million formal apology. The woman is untouchable. You should know this kind of weakness. Caring about civilians, it will get you killed someday. Men like us, we don't get happy endings. Maybe not, Vincent agreed. But at least I'll die knowing I tried to protect something good instead of just destroying it. As he left the warehouse, Vincent felt the weight of the past week finally catching up to him. It was done. Sofia was safe. Truly safe now. Protected by agreements that transcended any single family or organization. Dmitri would honor the deal because the alternative was his own destruction, and the other families would enforce it because they'd all agreed to it. Now came the hard part. Keeping his promise to send Sofia away. Sofia was sitting up when Vincent returned to her room at the facility. Color finally returning to her cheeks. 2 weeks had passed since the shooting, and Dr. Nakamura had declared her recovery remarkable, though still requiring another week of monitored care before she'd be medically cleared to leave. Physical therapy had begun, helping Sofia regain strength after the extended bed rest. The shooting wasn't random. You were targeted by Russian organized crime because they thought you might be a witness to something involving a corrupt senator. Once I understood that, I took steps to make sure they knew you were under my protection. That attacking you again would mean going to war with the Romano family. Protected me. Sofia repeated slowly. By threatening to start a mob war if necessary. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers moving slightly against his where their hands were still joined. The doctors told me I was saying your name when I was unconscious, fighting to stay alive. They said I kept calling for you. Do you know why that is, Vincent? He shook his head, not trusting his voice. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, even unconscious, I knew you would come. Sophia said softly. I knew you would make sure I was safe. I've known for months that there was something between us, some connection I couldn't explain. Every time you came to the hospital, I could feel you watching me from across the room. Every anonymous donation that arrived, I knew it was from you. Every time I treated a child, I wondered if you'd hear about it somehow. Sophia, let me finish, she said, her grip on his hand tightening despite her weakness. I'm not naive, Vincent. I know what you are, what you do, and I know I should be terrified right now, or at least wanting to get as far away from you as possible, but I'm not. Maybe I'm in shock. Or maybe the medications are affecting my judgment. Or maybe, she paused, her eyes meeting his directly. Maybe I've been falling for you since that first night in the pediatric ICU when you looked at your nephew with such love that I could see the man behind the reputation. Vincent felt like the world had tilted on its axis. You can't feel that way about me. Sophia, I'm dangerous. My world is violent and dark, and you deserve so much better than don't I get a say in what I deserve. Sophia asked, a hint of her usual spirit breaking through the exhaustion. Don't I get to decide what I want, who I want to trust? Not if it puts you in danger. And being close to me, being important to me, that's the most dangerous thing you could do. He stood abruptly, pulling his hand away from hers despite how much it cost him. Sophia, once you're recovered, I'm going to make sure you're safe. Really safe. New identity, if necessary. Relocation, money to start over somewhere far from New York and far from me. It's the only way I can protect you from the consequences of my life. And if I don't want that, Sophia's voice was trembling now, though whether from emotion or exhaustion, Vincent couldn't tell. If I want to stay here in New York living my life, if I want to see where this connection between us leads, then you'd be making a mistake that could cost you everything. Vincent said, his voice harder than he intended. The people who tried to kill you are just the beginning, Sophia. There will always be someone trying to use you against me. You know what I think? Sophia said, interrupting his thoughts. I think we're going to be okay. Not perfect. We'll have bad days and disagreements, and probably some seriously scary moments. But okay. Maybe even happy. Vincent pulled her closer, marveling at how this small woman had somehow become the center of his universe without him even noticing it happening. You were fighting for life and kept saying my name. He reminded her you could have called for anyone. Your mother, your friends, anyone. But you called for me. Because somewhere deep down, I knew you'd come. That you'd move heaven and earth to keep me safe. And you did. I always will, Vincent promised. That's not romance or hyperbole, Sophia. That's a promise from someone who understands the weight of promises. You're under Romano protection now, which means the full resources of my organization stand between you and anything that might hurt you. Even you. Sophia asked gently. Especially me. They sat there in comfortable silence as the city lights glimmered outside the windows. Two people from impossible worlds who'd somehow found each other in the darkness. A mob boss learning that power wasn't everything. A nurse teaching him that caring wasn't weakness. Two scarred souls deciding that together they might actually be whole. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be complications. Rival organizations testing boundaries. Law enforcement asking uncomfortable questions. The constant balancing act between Vincent's world and Sophia's work. But for the first time in his life, Vincent found himself looking forward to the future rather than simply surviving it. Because Sophia had been right. She'd fought for life and called his name. And in saving her, he'd somehow saved himself. 3 months later, Sophia stood at the window of Vincent's penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the autumn leaves drift past in the morning light. Her recovery had been complete, physically at least. The emotional scars ran deeper, manifesting in moments of startling awareness whenever she heard unexpected sounds or found herself in crowded spaces. But Vincent had been patient, understanding in ways that surprised them both. The Romano family had undergone subtle but significant changes since that night in the warehouse. Vincent's approach to leadership had evolved, becoming more strategic and less reactive. He'd established legitimate businesses as fronts. Yes, but also as genuine attempts to create something constructive. The civilian protection fund he'd mentioned to Dmitry had become real, funded not just by the Russians' compensation, but by contributions from all 5 families. Sophia had returned to nursing, but with enhanced security that she'd initially resisted and eventually accepted as the price of loving a man like Vincent. 2 of his people, trained in medical support, had taken jobs at the hospital. To most observers, they appeared to be orderly staff and security guards. In reality, they were Vincent's eyes and ears, ensuring Sophia's safety without interfering with her work. The arrangement had required delicate negotiations with hospital administration. Vincent's donations had grown substantial enough that Dr. Harrison, despite his initial reservations, had found ways to accommodate the unusual security requirements. Sophia's colleagues had noticed the changes but attributed them to the trauma of the shooting rather than her relationship with one of New York's most powerful crime bosses. Vincent entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, a domestic gesture that still felt surreal given the context of their lives. The man who commanded fear and respect throughout the city had learned to make her coffee exactly the way she liked it, strong with just a hint of cream. It was these small intimacies that made their impossible situation feel almost normal. The Harwood situation had resolved itself in ways that satisfied multiple interests. The senator had resigned citing health concerns, avoiding the scandal that would have erupted if Carlos's investigation had become public. Emily Harwood had quietly entered a rehabilitation facility, her stress and anxiety having manifested in ways that required professional treatment. The attorney Daniel Castellano had survived his wounds and, with the primary threat eliminated, had chosen to relocate his practice to Miami rather than continue fighting corruption cases in New York. Dmitry Volkov had honored their agreement, but Vincent knew the Russians' resentment simmered beneath the surface. The $2 million payment had been made, the formal apology delivered to the 5 families, but Dmitry's pride had been wounded. Vincent remained vigilant, knowing that wounded pride in their world often manifested years later in unexpected ways. The other family heads had taken notice of Vincent's handling of the situation. Isabella Caputo had been particularly impressed by his ability to secure a resolution without bloodshed while maintaining family honor. Salvatore Benedetti had begun seeking Vincent's counsel on matters requiring diplomatic solutions. The balance of power among the 5 families had shifted subtly but meaningfully in Vincent's favor. Alex had proven invaluable throughout the crisis and its aftermath. Vincent's lieutenant had demonstrated not only loyalty but strategic thinking that complemented Vincent's own approaches. Their working relationship had deepened into genuine friendship, rare in their world where trust was a luxury few could afford. Alex had also taken on more responsibility for the family's legitimate business interests, allowing Vincent to focus on the larger political landscape of organized crime in New York. Sophia's mother had initially struggled with her daughter's relationship choice. Maria Martinez was a practical woman who understood that love didn't always follow logical paths, but accepting that her daughter had fallen for a mafia boss required significant adjustment. Vincent had won her over gradually, through actions rather than words. When Maria needed expensive medical treatment for a recurring health issue, Vincent had arranged for the best specialists without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. When Sophia's childhood neighborhood faced gentrification that would displace longtime residents, Vincent had quietly purchased several buildings and kept rents affordable. These gestures, done without Sophia's knowledge until after the fact, had demonstrated to Maria that Vincent's feelings for her daughter were genuine and transformative. The pediatric ward at St. Mary's Hospital had become an unofficial symbol of Vincent's evolution. His donations had funded a new wing, state-of-the-art equipment, and additional nursing positions. Sophia's colleagues had noticed how children seemed drawn to the serious man who occasionally visited, how his expression softened when he watched her work. Vincent had discovered that being around Sophia's world, seeing the tangible good she accomplished every day, had given him perspective on his own choices and their consequences. Detective Wong had continued her investigation into the hospital shooting, but with the primary perpetrators dead or disappeared and no witnesses willing to testify, the case had gradually moved to the back burner. She suspected Vincent's involvement in the resolution but couldn't prove it. Murphy had been transferred to a different unit, his aggressive approach having generated complaints from multiple sources, including Catherine Walsh. Wong's final report on the case noted that while the shooters had been identified, their motives remained unclear and the case was being classified as closed pending new evidence. Dr. Nakamura had become an unlikely ally in Sophia's recovery process. The physician had initially been skeptical of Vincent's role in Sophia's life, but had gradually recognized that their relationship was helping rather than hindering her healing. Vincent's presence provided Sophia with a sense of security that medical treatment alone couldn't achieve. Nakamura had even consulted with Vincent on establishing trauma support protocols for hospital staff, recognizing that Vincent's resources could benefit other victims of violence. The warehouse where Vincent had interrogated Dmitry Solov had been quietly sold and converted into an art storage facility. Vincent had no desire to maintain spaces associated with violence, another sign of the changes Sophia's presence had brought to his thinking. Solov himself had been relocated to a small town in Montana with a new identity and enough money to start over. Vincent had kept his promise of protection, understanding that honor in their world required following through on commitments even to enemies. Carlos had been promoted within Vincent's organization, his intelligence work during the crisis having proven invaluable. He'd also begun developing relationships with law enforcement officers who could provide early warning about investigations that might affect family interests. These relationships were carefully cultivated, based on mutual benefit rather than corruption, another evolution in Vincent's approach to managing his organization's relationship with authority. The five families had established new protocols for handling threats that crossed organizational lines. Vincent's insistence on protecting civilians had influenced policy across all the families, creating a framework for cooperation that benefited everyone involved. When a rival organization from Philadelphia had attempted to expand into New York territory using tactics that endangered civilians, the five families had presented a united response that quickly resolved the situation. Sophia had gradually learned more about Vincent's world, not through dramatic revelations, but through quiet conversations and careful observation. She'd come to understand that while Vincent's business involved illegal activities, his personal code emphasized honor, loyalty, and protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. This understanding didn't eliminate her moral concerns, but it allowed her to see Vincent as a complex man rather than simply a criminal. Their relationship had required establishing boundaries and compromises that worked for both of them. Sophia had insisted on maintaining her independence in professional matters, continuing her nursing career without interference. Vincent had accepted this, recognizing that Sophia's work was central to who she was and that attempting to control it would damage what they were building together. In exchange, Sophia had agreed to security measures and had gradually begun attending some family social functions, understanding that Vincent's world required certain appearances to be maintained. The Romano estate had been modified to accommodate Sophia's presence. Vincent had converted one wing into a private sanctuary where Sophia could retreat when the pressures of his world became overwhelming. The space included a library, a small garden, and rooms designed for quiet reflection. It was here that Sophia often spent time when Vincent was handling family business, respecting the boundaries they'd established while remaining close enough for him to know she was safe. Christmas had brought new challenges and unexpected joy. Sophia's family celebration traditions clashed initially with the formal, somewhat austere approaches Vincent's world favored. But they'd found ways to blend their backgrounds, creating new traditions that honored both their histories. Vincent had discovered the pleasure of gift-giving driven by love rather than obligation or strategy. Sophia had learned to navigate the complex family dynamics that governed Vincent's social obligations. The hospital's annual charity gala had become a significant event for both of them. Vincent's attendance, with Sophia as his partner, had raised eyebrows initially, but had gradually been accepted as the new normal. His contributions to the hospital's mission had earned him respect even from colleagues who remained uncomfortable with Sophia's choice of partner. The event had also provided Vincent with opportunities to interact with legitimate community leaders, expanding his understanding of how power could be used constructively. Spring had brought news that Senator Harwood had died quietly in a private medical facility, officially from complications related to his previously announced health issues. The death had closed the final chapter on the corruption case that had originally threatened Sophia. Vincent had felt a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy, understanding that justice in their world often came through indirect means rather than public accountability. Sophia's recovery had included processing the psychological impact of having been targeted for death simply for showing compassion. This understanding had deepened her appreciation for Vincent's protective instincts while also strengthening her resolve to continue making a positive difference in the world. She'd begun volunteering with organizations that supported victims of violence, using her experience to help others navigate trauma and recovery. The Romano organization had quietly expanded its legitimate business interests, with Vincent personally overseeing investments in healthcare, education, and community development projects. These weren't merely fronts for illegal activities, but genuine attempts to create positive change. Sophia's influence had made Vincent more aware of how business decisions affected ordinary people, leading to approaches that considered community impact alongside profit. Alex had begun a relationship with Dr. Harrison's assistant, a development that amused Vincent and pleased Sophia. Watching his trusted lieutenant navigate the complexities of dating someone from outside their world provided Vincent with perspective on his own relationship challenges. Alex's experience also reinforced Vincent's belief that their world could evolve without losing its essential character. The changes in Vincent's approach had not gone unnoticed by other criminal organizations. Some saw his emphasis on civilian protection and legitimate business as weakness to be exploited. Others recognized it as strategic evolution that strengthened rather than weakened his position. Vincent had been careful to demonstrate that his new approaches didn't indicate any reduction in his willingness to respond decisively to genuine threats. Sophia had begun teaching basic medical skills to Vincent's security personnel, reasoning that their ability to provide emergency care could save lives in situations where professional medical help wasn't immediately available. This cross-training had proven valuable on several occasions, and had also helped bridge the gap between Sophia's world and Vincent's, creating mutual respect between people who might otherwise have little in common. The autumn of their first year together brought a crisis that tested everything they'd built. A federal investigation into organized crime in New York had begun focusing on the 5 families, with particular attention to their recent cooperation. Vincent found himself under surveillance that required him to be extraordinarily careful about his activities and associations. The investigation threatened not just his freedom but Sophia's safety, as federal prosecutors might view her as either a valuable witness or a liability to be leveraged. Vincent's response to the federal pressure demonstrated how much his thinking had evolved. Rather than relying solely on intimidation and corruption, he'd assembled a legal team that included some of the most respected defense attorneys in the country. He'd also begun cooperating selectively with authorities on matters that didn't compromise family interests, providing information about truly dangerous criminals who threatened community safety. Sophia's role during this period was crucial. Her presence in Vincent's life provided him with motivation to find solutions that didn't require violence. Her medical background had proven valuable in understanding the psychological profiles of the federal agents involved in the investigation, helping Vincent's team develop strategies for managing the inquiry without escalating tensions. The investigation had ultimately concluded without major indictments. Vincent's legitimate business interests provided sufficient legal cover for his activities, and his cooperation on community safety matters had earned him consideration as a valuable community asset rather than simply a criminal target. The experience had reinforced his conviction that evolution was not just personally satisfying, but strategically necessary. As their second year together began, Vincent and Sophia had settled into a rhythm that accommodated both their needs. Vincent continued to lead his organization, but with approaches that reflected Sophia's influence on his thinking. Sophia continued her nursing career, but with an understanding of how her relationship affected her safety and the safety of those around her. The Romano name had become associated not just with power and fear, but with a certain honor and community responsibility that distinguished Vincent's organization from others. This reputation had practical benefits. attracting higher quality associates and creating opportunities for profitable cooperation with legitimate businesses and community organizations. Sophia's influence extended beyond Vincent to the broader family organization. Wives and girlfriends of other family members had begun to see her as a model for how civilian partners could maintain their own identities while supporting their partners' roles in the organization. Her medical skills had been called upon several times to provide discreet health care for family members who couldn't risk normal medical attention. The pediatric ward at St. Mary's had become a place where Vincent could observe the best of human nature through Sophia's work. Watching her comfort frightened children and support worried families had taught him about strength that didn't require force and power that came from service rather than domination. These lessons had influenced his leadership style in ways that strengthened rather than weakened his organization. Their love story had become something of a legend within their respective worlds. Hospital staff spoke of the nurse who'd captured the heart of one of the city's most feared men and somehow made him gentler without making him weak. Members of Vincent's organization told stories about their boss who'd risked war to protect a woman who barely knew him and had somehow found peace without losing respect. As Vincent stood beside Sophia at the window, watching the city they both served in their different ways, he understood that their relationship represented more than personal happiness. It was evidence that people could change without losing themselves, that love could bridge worlds that seemed incompatible, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships created the strongest foundations for the future. Sophia turned from the window and smiled at him, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. In her eyes, he saw not judgment of his past or fear of his present, but acceptance of who he was becoming. She'd kept her promise to fight for life, and in doing so, she'd taught him that there were things worth fighting for beyond territory and respect and revenge. "You know what I think," Sophia said, echoing words she'd spoken months ago in a hospital bed. "I think we're going to be more than okay. I think we're going to build something beautiful together." Vincent pulled her closer, marveling again at how this woman had walked into his life during its darkest moment and somehow brought light without demanding that he abandon everything that made him who he was. They had found a way to love each other across the boundaries of their different worlds, creating something new that honored both their histories while building toward a future neither could have imagined alone. And in the end, Vincent Romano and Sofia Martinez had discovered that the strongest foundations for love weren't built on shared backgrounds or compatible lifestyles, but on the willingness to see the best in each other and the courage to grow toward that vision together. Their story was proof that sometimes the most powerful transformations came not from abandoning who you were, but from becoming the best version of yourself for someone who believed in that possibility, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The city stretched out below them, full of all the complexity and contradiction that had brought them together. Vincent's empire continued to operate in the shadows, but now it cast a different kind of shadow, one that protected rather than merely dominated. Sophia's hospital continued to save lives and heal wounds, but now it also stood as a symbol of how love could reach across any divide and create understanding where none had existed before. Together, they had written a love story that proved some boundaries were meant to be crossed, some worlds were meant to collide, and some people were meant to find each other despite all the reasons why they shouldn't. Their love had survived bullets and betrayal, federal investigations and family obligations, because it was built on something stronger than circumstance or convenience. It was built on the recognition that real love doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to become the best version of who you already are. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who sees that best version even when you can't see it yourself, and loves you enough to help you grow into it. That was what Vincent Romano and Sofia Martinez had found in each other, and what they continued to build together, one day at a time, in a city that had witnessed their love story unfold against all odds, and had somehow been made better by their presence in it.